Hello everyone, I'm Hash Brown and welcome back to the Shadowbringers Dungeon Lore series. In this series, I hope to explain the lore of each dungeon in Final Fantasy XIV, as well as to be informative about some maybe more niche things about them. Today's dungeon is Mount Gulg. The island of Calusia stands apart from the remaining inhabitable landmasses in the first, separate from the regions of Lakeland and Amareng and far from the Crystarium. Infamously, the isle contains the proclaimed capital city of Northrend, Yulmore. As we know, the city was originally opposed to the Sin Eaters, fighting with vigour with the help of the reincarnating oracle Minfilia. Since the reign of Lord Vorthri began, their opinions changed and the peoples became spoiled and complicit with living life in their city, safe under the assumption that Vorthri's strange power would prevent the Eaters from attacking those taking residence within. Although Yulmore takes up much of the horizon on the southern half of Calusia, a quick observation towards the north side of the region shows a gigantic cliff face rising high above even the city. A great metal lift once ran from top to bottom, allowing the transport of goods and people to the upper side. Once at the top, the mountain range stands taller still to the north, with the most prominent among them, Mount Gulg, rising high over the island, eclipsing its fellows and standing as a landmark for the north end of Calusia. After successfully defeating the 4th Light Warden, the Warrior of Light and the Scions return to the Crystarium, where the Warrior of Light continues to have issues containing the now pulsating light kept within them. In the Pendants, Arbit tries reaching into the Warrior of Light, causing a spark of light in the tainted ether to subside for the moment. After doubting his role in the saving of Northrend, the Exarch arrives to check on the Warrior of Light, requesting their aid for the final fight against the last remaining Light Warden. Soon after this, we enter the Oracle to discuss the move to Calusia with our allies, and after Y'shtola taunts Emixelt's soon-to-be ruined plan, he decides to give a more in-depth explanation of the time before the Sundering. The rejoining, although thought to be a scheme of madness by non-Asians, was actually a plea to rescue the latter's long-lost homeworld, and bring back life eternal in the Source, with Zodiark as the one true god. Oddly though, Emixelt seems undeterred by our progress within the first, egging us on to defeat the final Light Warden to prove our worth. Lina arrives shortly after, telling of Yulmore's military moving to entrench key positions in the city, leading the group to believe that the Light Warden may be held within the place itself. In Rite, we rendezvous with Alphinaud and begin heading towards Gate Town, finding odd citizens along the way seemingly enthralled and moaning Vorthri's name. In Gate Town itself, we find many of its inhabitants facing towards Yulmore, completely still and apparently entranced by something out of plain sight. Alizé arrives with Kaishir, who explains that after Vorthri returned on the airships from Amareng, a horrible hot wind ran through the area, causing the people's current state except for a few newcomers. Y'shtola then asks Reen to examine some of the meal handed out as food to the Gate Town citizens, and she gasps as she recognises it. The substance is actually made entirely from Sin Eater, leading the group to guess that most living in the town for a while were enthralled thanks to the steady intake of the meal over the years. After cursing his name, Alphinaud and the rest make ready to storm the city to oust the Light Warden and Vorthri from their cushy comforts. Inside the city limits, Vorthri's voice calls out stronger, sending the shambling citizens down towards the group. Incapacitating them as to not do lasting harm, our allies eventually send us and Alphinaud onwards where we encounter the 2 jonglers that would invite new citizens to Yulmore. After defeating them, we quickly rush up the stairs towards the canopy, where Alphinaud remains to fend off the chasing soldiers as we reach the Aetheryte Plaza. Predictably, a familiar foe in Ronjita waits to block our path, but this time the Warrior of Light is at full strength and ready to fight. After a long and grueling fight against the commander's full strength, we finally lay him low, where he remains still on the plaza floor for good. Our allies reconvene and we quickly head to the Crown Lift to confront Vorthri in his chamber. The man faces away from the group as they enter, and Alphinaud immediately shouts for him to show remorse in his actions. Reen, however, recoils, again shocked at the presence she feels. She tells the group that the Warden is not just a Sin Eater, but a man, the very one standing before them, devouring meal. Vorthri unsurprisingly rejects Alphinaud's words, talking to himself and insanely convincing himself to be the righteous ruler of the world, believing himself destined to reign on high. His rage then bursts, and he slams his fist in an almost tantrum-like way, but again begins talking in an eerily calm and happy demeanour about rebuilding his paradise. Reen notices the danger signs and tries to warn the group, but Vorthri suddenly sprouts wings as a piercing cry rings out and stuns the Scions. Awakening soon after, the floor begins to tremble violently, and the group looks over the balcony towards the cliffs of Calusia, citing an almighty and terrifying change to the landscape. Mount Gulg itself, torn from the ranges below, flying high above Calusia with a golden sort of halo surrounding it, a true throne in the eyes of Vorthri. Although the group wishes to give chase, they instead look to assisting the injured within Yulmore. After helping those in need dotted around the city, many of the citizens gather in the canopy to ask what happened, and Alphinaud delivers a speech explaining Vorthry's treachery, and how he was a sin-eater all along. The topic then turns to how to give chase to the latter, having fled to the top of the White Cliffs. Although some suggest an airship, an older resident knows of the Great Lift used to transport materials between the two sides. Unfortunately, the device in question requires Talos to operate, but Dulia Chai perks up and nudges her husband, revealing him to be a master of the Daedalus stoneworks. Although reluctant at first, Chinas eventually agrees from the look of his wife, and brings others with him to help. At the Great Lift, the ladder, we are asked to retrieve a number of wooden planks to assist in the repair of the lift, and after doing so, Emet arrives once more and marvels at the cooperation of the Umoran citizens. He reminisces about his own times where man would unite as one against danger and destruction, and mentions the great city of Amarot. After disappearing, Ardbert also appears and speaks on his feelings throughout the years of wandering as a spirit. He notes that Emet feelings of solitude must be greatly intensified thanks to the several thousand years he spent doing the same. The twins then approach and inform us that the lift is ready to use, and we join them on the first travel on the device for a long time. At the top, Alizé points out a small settlement to the northeast, and although it would seem abandoned, she also sighted a man making his way towards it while moving suspiciously. After looking ourselves, we spot the same man who notices our presence and flees. We give chase to the village of Amity and have a look around, spotting clear signs of recent activity dotted around. The same man familiar then shows himself, which turns out to be Tristal, the artist cast from Yulmore by the Chais. He explains that after his exile, a friend led him through a secret tunnel to the top of the Bright Cliffs, and he settled into their community of those banished from Yulmore. Alizé then joins us in scouting the area nearby to Mount Gulg, where both encounter several Sin-Eaters thanks to Vorthry's presence. At the foot of the mountains, we wonder if flying to the place might even be possible, and several Allagan bits suddenly fly in, immediately swarmed by the Eaters floating around the airspace. Looking around, they seem to have been sent by the Exarch, who has arrived in Calusia, and the group notes that flying will certainly be impossible with the vast number of Sin-Eaters surrounding the place. Returning to the ladder, the Chais too also made their way up, and the group puts their heads together to discuss options for attacking Vorthry's hideaway. Although unsure at first, Y'shtola takes inspiration from Dulia Chai's words, suggesting that a great and mighty Talos could reach up to the mountain to hold it to the earth and provide a pathway to the top. Although Chinas debates it to be possible, he holds that the amount of work needed would be unimaginable without an army of workers. Thanks to the connections made throughout Norvrand on our journey, the Scions each head out to drum up support from the Amareng miners, Mordsuk, the Crystarium, the Knights Blessed, and even Yulmore itself, much to China's surprise. Following this, the Mistel gets dejected over the great effort required for the project, and we psych him up before leading him into Amity to discuss the lay of the land with Tristal. At first the latter scorns Chinas for his attitude during the time in Yulmore, but with a heartfelt apology Tristal agrees to help, citing looking to the future instead of dwelling in the past. He then directs us to the Thol dwarves living in Tomra to the northwest, and with the Exarch we arrive in the settlement and are greeted by Xamot. After telling them our tale, the dwarf agrees to offer assistance, but only if the Warrior of Light passes a trial made for the dwarves, involving identifying the odd dwarf out. After doing so twice in a row, we return to Xamot, who recognises our talent and agrees to help. He tells us of a special mineral known as Earthseed that was once used for various constructions, and that the richest veins lie to the east in Doegar's Tool. Unfortunately, the area is occupied by the Gulgs, rivals of the Tomra dwarves, but if they can be handled, then the Earthseed is for the taking. A young dwarf named Korat suddenly volunteers, eager and ready to go, and Xamot asks the Warrior of Light to protect him along the way as the dwarf's battle skills are mediocre at best. We journey across the upper half of Calusia, tackling a large amount of stray Sin-Eaters along the way, felling an enormous bestial one just outside the tunnel. Proceeding to the Tool, we develop a plan to procure the Ursi without raising the alarm of the Gulgs, with Korat being made invisible by the Crystal Exarch, while the Warrior of Light uses the familiar Dream Powder to incapacitate the patrolling Gulgs. Returning to the Exarch, Korat also arrives with a full sack of Urseed, but another Gulg returning through the tunnel spots the group, leading to the Exarch using more Dream Powder and the group fleeing the scene before alerting more dwarves. With the job done, the Exarch heads straight back to the workers with the Urseed while the Warrior of Light accompanies Korat back to Tomra. Xamot seems to have rounded up more help from the dwarves, and hands over some modified dwarven pickaxe for use by the larger peoples, and we return to the top rung to find a whole host of helpers awaiting us. Alizé is surprised but pleased with our haul of pickaxes, as tools are in short supply, and we go around giving them out to Magnus and his crew with the Vis of Ronga, as well as the Mord and inhabitants from Amareng with the Crystarium and Yulmar citizens. Once the workers move out to their respective jobs, Alphino asks us to return to Amity to see how Y'shtola is getting on with the mages required for the Talos. She tells us that while the workers get to their posts, Chinuz is finalising the designs for the Talos. Although he wishes for more time for his calculations, he tells the group that the sheer size of this project may require several hearts for the Talos. Y'shtola then turns to Runar, who presents a basket full of the Heartstones from the Lost Knights Blessed. And thanks to their nature, they are imbued with a great amount of magic due to the prayer bestowed by their fellows. Chinuz agrees that they will serve well for the peripheral hearts, and Y'shtola requests that the Warrior of Light 2 imbues one for good luck. We do so upon a familiar green one, belonging to Todia from Slitherbell, the same Heartstone we retrieved from the Sin Eaters with Reen. The group then moves out to put the Heartstones in place, but Y'shtola questions Irionje on measures taken should the light within the Warrior of Light breaks free, to which he replies that all things required are ready. After a chat with Julia Chai, she asks us to find the Exarch, who seems to have wandered off, and we find him next to a rock overlooking the cliff, apparently out of energy due to his extended absence from the Crystal Tower. We speak with him on the current situation and talk about plans after the First is freed from the Plague of Light. While we think on the ongoing war with the Empire and the Source, the Exarch hopes to reconcile with a friend who knows not the depths of his sins, and hopes that that person can regale him with tales of their other great adventures, and perhaps even to bring him along for the next one. He then gets to his feet and looks up to the floating mountain, determined to succeed in fulfilling the people's hopes. Back in Amity, Chinuz informs us that the Talos is ready to be awakened, and the Exarch gives the order to do so to begin the assault on the mountain. From our viewpoint in Amity, a great pillar of light emerges and the ground trembles. The magic slowly weaves across the various stone assembled and begins to combine to form the Talos' body. Ardbert watches on in amazement as the great stone hand reaches up, followed by the torso of the enormous golem. The Sin Eaters begin to fight back, attacking the Talos with all their might. They seem to be focusing on the hands in an attempt to prevent the Talos grasping the mountain, and the Exarch suggests we move into action to distract them. Just then, however, a great swarm of flying creatures approaches the battle, led by Titania themselves, fuming again over our lack of contact in times of need. With their help, the Fey forces fend off the Sin Eaters enough for the Talos to successfully grab and pull down the mountain somewhat. With it firmly in place, the Exarch sends the Warrior of Light to the base of the mountain to meet the rest of our allies. They make final preparations, and Y'shtola reminds us of the path up the Talos onto the mountain proper, and we stand ready to fight the Sin Eaters for our friends, as well as hopefully the final step in bringing salvation to the First. With a hefty climb, the group arrives on the shoulder of the Great Talos, still clinging to the mountain. As expected, a veritable army of Sin Eaters awaits any invaders along its back, and soon the group is swarmed by them, of all kinds and sizes. As we progress, Vorthri's voice calls from above, observing our every move. Rounding the corner past the head of the Talos, another of his arms reaches up and crushes some wandering eaters floating above the mountain, and the next set we encounter is accompanied by a familiar gold-tinged Sin Eater seen previously with Vorthri, apparently one of his favourites. After evading its attacks and defeating the next group of the Eaters, the Talos arms rises up and swipes away the protruding rock face, allowing the party into the perished path, where yet another of Vorthri's accompanying Sin Eaters awaits. Forgiven cruelty, the great crowned and winged lion seen in Yulmore alongside the gold-tinged Eater begins defending its master, and as another Eater it unleashes light-based attacks, along with using its wings to whip out deadly winds at the party. Firstly, it slashes the tanking party member with Rake, a dangerous swipe, and follows it up with Lumen Infinitum, blasting a line of exploding light in front of the Sin Eater as it flies high to attack. Afterwards it heads to the centre of the platform and takes flight again, unleashing heavy winds from the centre in multiple spiralling gales. After this, another cyclone damages the group, and although the Sin Eater begins repeating its attacks, its next typhoon releases currents of wind around the platform, slicing any nearby with cutting winds as the spiralling ones expand at the same time. After avoiding them and carefully avoiding its light beam, the Sin Eater falls and the party moves on to the pallid path, where the next wave of the smaller Sin Eaters attack. Part of the way along, a large Sin Eater forms a wall similar to the demon walls of Amdapor Keep, blocking our path and blasting the group with earth-shaking attacks until defeated. As we move up through the tunnel, we emerge onto the top side of the mountain, finding structures made of white material more frequently as we go. Another wall demon Sin Eater appears as we reach the entirely white section of the mountain, and after felling it we arrive at the White Gate, where an enormous, many-faced cube of a Sin Eater known as Forgiven Whimsy awaits us. This creature seems to have been chosen by Vorthree to guard his throne, and is said to have been formed from what was once a pack of creatures. Said to have such seamless synergy that even in their Sin Eater form they appear to be a single entity. However, each cube appears independent from the rest. Its name meanwhile refers to the vague whimsical nature of its movements as it prepares its attacks. Sacrament of Penance blasts the platform with lightning, and the creature soon shows its coordination, rapidly organising its different cubes into a new form. Several of the faces glow as it prepares Exegesis, and it soon launches a pillar of light across the separate tiles of the platform, corresponding to the shape formed by the glowing faces. It follows this up with Catechism, striking the tanking party member with light. It's worth noting that each attack from Forgiven Whimsy corresponds to a teaching or term from real-life Christianity, with the Sacrament of Penance regarding the absolving of sins, Exegesis being an interpretation of scripture, and Catechism referring to a manual of instruction used to testify the faith. Judgment Day is its next attack, again referring to the same name from Christianity, but in our case it causes orbs of light to descend from the sky, which must be absorbed by the party to prevent them contacting the ground and exploding. Another Exegesis attack comes forth, this time with expanding orbs of light around the arena, reducing the amount of safe space available. After managing to avoid the cube's coordinated assault, the creatures tremble and crumble apart, allowing the party through to the palace proper. Vorthree's voice rings out once more, still believing himself to be the righteous one, and we begin encountering the last wave of the defending Eaters. The ones here begin to receive Vorthree's blessing, causing them to grow in size and strength and fight ever more fiercely. After another wave of the Eaters, we eventually reach a final platform guarded by an enormous Eater seemingly made of the same material as the palace, which slams upon the platform as the party tries to tackle it. After it dissipates, the rubble left behind allows the group up to the Winding Flare, where we encounter another familiar Eater sent by Vorthree himself. Sent charging from Vorthree's throne, the gold-tinged Sin Eater we saw earlier arrives to face us as a final obstacle before confronting the Light Warden at last. This creature, Forgiven Obscenity, is one of Vorthree's personal favourites of his light-tainted companions, and even beforehand we saw them accompanying him in his chambers in Yulmore. They were once said to be a songstress that worked in the Beehive, but Apomacrest visited Vorthree for the ascension process to become what they are now. With their previous life as a singer, their attacks as a Sin Eater reflect the past, all being themed around different volumes and forms of prayer. Orison Fortissimo strikes the group with an explosion of light, while Divine Diminuendo strikes around the Sin Eater, forcing the group away. Vorthree cries out following this, giving the same blessing to the last defender, and she strikes with another Divine Diminuendo, this time empowered with an outer ring to the attack, leaving a sliver of room to avoid it. Conviction Marcato launches a stream of light in front of the Eater, but also triggers 4 surrounding beams from the empowerment from Vorthree. Penance Pianissimo then forms light around the edges of the arena, causing heavy damage if stepped on. The Sin Eater follows up with Feather Marionette, disappearing and reappearing as multiple copies descend from above. While each copies the attack performed by the real one, the latter still glows as a way to identify which attack will be empowered, and the party can evade accordingly. When injured, Forgiven Obscenity prepares for Solitaire Rings, disappearing once more as light orbs appear. She calls forth rings for each orb, which when contacted quickly accelerate the Light Eater, blasting any stood in front of them. Dodging to the side and back as the inner ones release, the party evades and the Eater returns, striking the tanking party member with Sacraments for Zando. The fight continues into another Feather Marionette, this time with the copies using Conviction Marcato. After the main foe returns, she uses a last Fortissimo and falls, allowing access to Vorthree's hideout at last. At the base of the Grand Stairs, Vorthree begins admonishing our actions, still desperately attempting to convince us of his righteousness. When Alphinaud and Rhys snap back at him that his justice is a falsehood, however, and recount their own stories in the first, his temper breaks and he screams out for silence. He summons forth another horde of golden sin eaters, and while the Scions take care of them, we charge up the stairs to face him in his immaculate chamber. At the pinnacle of the mountain, Vorthri faces us, unsurprisingly unleashing light-based attacks while calling forth several more sin eaters to defend him. When he begins to be overwhelmed, however, the light seems to burst from him uncontrollably, with odd wings sprouting from his back. With a scream, the light overtakes him completely and his form changes, becoming a handsome winged man adorned with swords and a lance. The attacks become much more graceful and deadly, as well as their names becoming much more in line with Vorthri's false righteousness, culminating in an attack with myriad blades of light that rain down upon the group. After some more fighting, Innocence finally staggers and falls, and the Warrior of Light prepares to free Norvrand from his light. Lying before us, Innocence despairs over his fate, still crediting himself as the true god, and eventually dissipates into the great amount of ether as the Warrior of Light steps forward. We take the light in, sealing it within ourselves, and immediately experience a vision of the past in Yulmore. A man, Vorthri's father, declares outrage about the attitude of the citizens, when Emmett Selk appears and offers a proposal. Bringing a Light Warden to the city, it imbues the unborn Vorthri with the power to control the Sin Eaters, and we watch as the great winged lion cows before the newborn child. In the present, the Warrior of Light loses control and begins to have the light burst from them, and the sky begins to change back from night to the everlasting light from before. Although the Scions begin to panic, the Exarch arrives and begins speaking. He claims that the sole reason he asked the Warrior of Light to contain the Light Wardens was not to free the First, but to claim their power for his own and use the Crystal Tower to visit other worlds. The Scions cry out in alarm, but Urianger quells them with a shout. Y'shtola, cottoning on, recognizes the danger signs from the Exarch and calls out his act, that it was only a reason to be able to take the Light Ether and vanish, and although this would free the First, it would take the Exarch's life along with it. The Warrior of Light reaches out to him, but he assures us not to worry and focuses on channeling the spell. The shockwave from doing so shakes his hood from his head, and his face is revealed at last, a familiar red-headed Mikote with the red eyes of Alag. Although the Warrior of Light calls him by his name, his face fills with emotion as he thanks us for our belief in saving this world. He continues channeling the spell with a final smile, but as we look on, a gunshot rings out. The Exarch staggers and falls, and behind him we see Emmett Selk himself holding the gun, and ponders the man's origin. As one with the eyes of the Royal Lion, the Ascian deduced that the Exarch must have arrived with the tower in the First. He then turns to the Warrior of Light, mocking and expressing his disappointment with us, and explains to the Scions that all he said was indeed the truth. Although he wishes for the rejoining, he genuinely considers taking us on as allies. But now that we can't handle the bursting light within, the time for that is past. He revels in the idea that after our transformation into the one great Light Warden, those around us will slowly turn too, eventually affecting the whole world and plunging the First past the tipping point of light, forcing him rejoining once again. He then prepares to leave, whisking the Exarch away with a snap of his fingers, claiming him as a token prize to glean some information. Taking flight, he looks down upon us with pity, offering us to visit the Tempest to transform away from prying eyes should we desire it. The Warrior of Light then collapses, almost blinded by the light as our allies close in around us. And that's the end of the story and lore of Mount Gulg. A mountain raised from its roots high above Calusia by the final Light Warden of the world, seemingly out of reach. With the people's help, we managed to make a miracle happen and quite literally clutch it out of the sky, allowing us to reach Vorthri's lair. After a hard fight he was felled, but the resulting light was too much for the Warrior of Light, and even though the Exarch gave a show, he was gunned down by the Ascian himself. With them both gone, the Warrior of Light is whisked back to the Crystarium, where with Arbut they look out of the window upon the returned and accursed light now plaguing the sky, not only in the Crystarium, but across all of Norvrand once more. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more Final Fantasy XIV stuff, and I'll see you next time for Armorot.